how do you help? As you said, first-time manager always bad, but as a manager, when you start taking on other teams, how do you help the new managers, first-time managers, to
Yeah.
make less mistakes with more support when they are challenged?
That's a tough one because it's like that impulse to want to jump in and fix everything is still there.
I feel the transition from first-time manager to the first layer manager to a second layer
Yeah.
manager is so challenging, probably even more challenging than the IC to manager transition, because now you're managing someone that owns a team, and it's just a
Yeah.
very different dynamic. It's not just I can manage a team, now I can manage two teams. It's not like that.
Yeah. I guess it's a couple things, right? I think one of it is if I'm dealing with someone who's more an experienced manager. So one of the teams I had at Disney, like that team had been around for a really long time. They're one of the first squads. I had inherited them and the lead on that team. I mean, he didn't need anything from me, really. Like more of this is what we need to do. This is kind of what's happening. Like I kind of stepped in when I needed to, but for the most I mean, they had been functioning pretty well and none of them were new. Like I was the new portion of that. I wasn't coming in with an inexperienced leader. When you're dealing with someone who's also a new leader, I think, so I have, if you may have noticed, I tend to be pretty direct. So I have you're going to be an awful manager in the beginning. Just accept it. Just lean into the humility. You're going to be bad. Here are the ways with which you're going to be bad, probably. They might be these over this. And let's just work on them. Let's just see. The goal is not to avoid it because you're not going to, but the goal is to get through it as fast as possible. Right. And so
I love that distinction. That's great.
And I think the thing is like, you're always trying to find this balance between I see the stuff that's happening and do I need to throw out a bumper or do I need to be like, you have to run into the wall because that's actually going to impart the lesson. But I do try to care for everyone, right? I don't want the people who are who are on the other end of that to feel the brunt of that. But I also don't want to, diminish like the learning that the new leader needs to do. I actually just had this conversation with a colleague of mine who's on an old team and is working with a new manager. And she was asking me she's having this conflict with this new manager and then was saying, okay, I'm going to go to the director, right? Because she used to work for the director. So we're having this conversation and I said, what do you want to get out of the conversation with the director? What is the goal with that? And she's like, well, I mean, like he's worked with me before. So I just want to know what he thinks about this thing. And I said, okay, do you want to know what he thinks because you're trying to get better? Or do you want to know what he thinks because you want him to tell you that the manager's wrong? Right? Because if that's what you want, that's probably not going to happen. He's not going to do that, right? Like he's not going to go and tell you that his direct report is wrong. So what do you really want out of this? And so she was like, oh, okay, that's like a good point. Yeah, I kind of want that. I'm like, well, that's not going to happen. So, but if you do want his opinion about the conflict, I think you should approach it from the perspective of, I don't understand. Can you please help me understand? I value your opinion. You're someone I reported to for 2 years. Help me understand, not please tell me that your manager's wrong. I was like, because that's not a thing that if he's a good director, he's not going to do that, right? He doesn't want to be in the middle of you two. You have to kind of sort that out.
This is going to be kind of I guess not really a weird follow-up question, but I've noticed in a lot of these stories, like Tara, when you're mentioning directness, the way in which you've shared about communicating to me sort of evokes this like compassionate directness, where you're telling somebody something that may be like a difficult thing to break to them. But when I hear it from you, I'm like, there's just so much compassion behind that. And like this intent that whatever the feedback is, it comes from a place of trying to support and help that person. So I guess my question is like, how can somebody cultivate that? And so I guess the question's weird because it's how do you cultivate compassion? But like in the context of communicating directly, how can you help somebody cultivate like that more compassionate directness?
Man, these questions are great. Man, that's a good one. Wow, I have so many thoughts. I'm not sure if all of this is going to make sense, but
let's roll with it.
Yeah, I think the first thing is you have to be like, I view very strongly in authentic leadership. What you see is what you get. And it doesn't mean that I don't understand how I need to like maybe present in different audiences. Of course I do, right? Like how I would talk to my peer versus my direct report versus my VP are very different things. But the through line is me, and no one is ever thinking they're not talking to me. There's just different facets of me. So I think you have to be yourself. That's number one. And people need to feel that what they're seeing is who you are. And so I really try to cultivate the expectation that I will not lie to you. Right? Like I will, even when you don't want to hear it, I will tell you. And I will not lie to you does not mean I will tell you everything. Sometimes things are not appropriate to share. Sometimes things create churn and swirl, which are not helpful. But when I'm telling you something, it's coming from a place of caring about your well-being to make you better. And I, depending, sometimes that happens out of just time. We built that. And sometimes it happens because like in those first couple one-on-ones, like this is who I am as a leader. And I will live up to this every time. And if you ever see me not living up to that, then I want you to tell me that. And so I think kind of having that bearing just tends to let me get away with saying stuff sometimes that other people can't say. One of my old bosses at Disney used to always laugh about that. You can go in a room and say, that thing is stupid. Why are you doing that? And people are like, you're right, Tara. And he's like, if I did that, everyone would freak out.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get at. Like, it's so apparent though, but it sounds like it just comes from a place of care. So it's like, that's magic.
I think it's not shying away from that genuine vulnerability that like, hey, like we're all people here and we're trying to do the best we can. And none of us have eyes in the back of our heads. And that's what we have to be for each other. I mean, I'm trying to think like, how do you cultivate that? I mean, think about your own empathy. Like just empathy is how you cultivate it. How did you feel when someone wasn't straight with you, right? Or when people had an opinion and they didn't tell you and you were walking around looking like an idiot. How did that feel? Why would you want anyone to feel that way? I really do believe my job is to make those around me better. I just try not to shy away from things that do that. So I don't know if I have a full answer other than.
Well, I think that question of like, how did you feel when somebody wasn't straight with you or direct with you or helped you in that way, I think is a really powerful reflection question because I'm thinking like, okay, in the context, this might be like giving somebody feedback or like trying to figure out a project decision. And so for me, it's okay, that's just like a good, like in your checklist of like preparing for that conversation, ask that first as you enter into it. So then I feel like that reduces the friction to not want to share directly in a way. So I really appreciate that reflection question.
I think the other part is that how liberating that can be by just being comfortable, being yourself.
Absolutely.